And people are streaming in, which is great. For those of you who are just joining us, please introduce yourself in the chat. We love to see who's here with us. It's exciting to see people from so many different places. We are a mixed multitude.
Oh, West Coast.
Been getting some pushback from people in Israel who are annoyed that we're not doing this at a time when they would normally be awake. So we may have to try some earlier times.
Are they archived or no?
They are. We record and then we have them on our site.
Okay, cool. Someone was asking.
No, Abby. I'll see you after. We did.
Oh, Seattle. I'm in Portland. I'm close to Seattle. I grew up in Baltimore. I'm just going to comment on all the locations.
You guys should be able to see, for those of you, if you go down to the bottom of your screen, you'll see that there's a little icon for chat. And if you click on that, you'll be able to see everybody's comments and chats coming in for those of you who want to follow along. It's nice to see familiar names and faces and new ones too. It's wonderful.
Hey, Marcia.
That was my Omer counter going off.
Ooh.
Nice. We could do that at future meetings. That'd be fun.
That's true. I'm gonna rename myself, actually. Okay. And if Lex, if you want to make me back to the host, if that's all set.
I think I am. Well, 1 second. I might. Oh, no, I am. Sorry. There we go.
Wonderful. Should we get started?
Sounds perfect. Yeah, I'm just getting it pasted onto the Jewish Live website, but
Okay.
we're good to go.
Great. So welcome everybody to the Quarantine Book Club hosted by the Jewish Women's Archive and Jewish Live. I'm Judith Rosenbaum. I'm the CEO of JWA, and I'm really excited to be able to be here with all of you tonight. I hope you've had a meaningful Passover so far, and we're excited to be able to add a little bit of Passover joy and celebration to your experience tonight. For those of you who don't know, JWA is a digital archive devoted to expanding the Jewish narrative. We document Jewish women's stories and elevate their voices, and we inspire all people to see themselves as history makers. Our site, jwa.org, which I hope you will check out, is the world's biggest source of resources about Jewish women, and we love to dig into all the historical material that we have to help us better understand the issues that matter to us today. We have many different kinds of programs. I could spend the whole hour telling you about all of those, which I won't do, but one of them is our online book club, which offers book suggestions and original content from authors, and the Quarantine Book Club draws on these resources. So you can sign up for updates on our site and follow along with our book club on Goodreads as well.
Yes, and just a quick intro of Jewish Live for those who are new to Jewish Live. First off, we are thrilled to be partnering with JWA on this amazing Quarantine Book Club. It has been sensational so far, and on both the JWA website and the Jewish Live website, you can access previous editions of the Quarantine Book Club. So definitely check those out. On our end, it is jewishlive.org/ click recordings. It's a tab on the Jewish Live website, and you'll find the Quarantine Book Club previous recordings. They've been awesome, so check those out. The only other quick note is that Jewish Live just launched our brand new Facebook page, which is going to be the go-to spot for all of our live streaming on Facebook. So we hope that you'll give that a like. But with that, that's really the main announcements. Alicia Jo Rabins is a personal, I met you about, I don't know, a year ago, and I told you in our first interview of you before we went on the air that, look, I will insist to my grave that I am your biggest fan. I've listened to Girls in Trouble many, many times, so many tracks. So it's a thrill to have you here. And I'll pass it back to you and to Judith and head off a video. Bye, everyone.
Thank you, Lex. So I hope that everybody is doing well tonight, that you've had a good beginning to Passover. I suspect that many people feel like me, like the metaphor of wandering in the desert and being in the wilderness feels apt this year. Before we begin, just a little bit of logistics. As you will probably already have noticed, we do not have video and audio enabled for participants because we will have a large crowd, which is fabulous. But we do love to encourage a sense of community. So please introduce yourself in the chat box with your name and where you're located. If you are having trouble finding the chat box, if you mouse down to the bottom of your screen, you'll see that you can click there. And if you don't want to follow along in the chat box, you can also close it so that you don't get distracted by scrolling through the event. Once we start the conversation, you should feel free to ask questions in the chat box, and I'll be pulling from those in the second half of the program. So I'm really so thrilled to be here tonight with an old friend of mine and of JWA's, Alicia Jo Rabins, who's a writer, musician, composer, performer, teacher of Torah. She creates all different kinds of artistic works that explore the intersection of ancient wisdom and everyday life, and we'll get to have a taste of that tonight. Alicia's first collection of poetry, Divinity School, won the 2015 APR Honigman First Book Prize and was a finalist for the Oregon Book Award. And her second collection, Fruit Geode, was published in 2018 and was a JWA Book Club pick that year. As a musician and performer, she is the creator and performer of Girls in Trouble, an indie folk song cycle about the complicated lives of biblical women that has an amazing accompanying curriculum that JWA has been thrilled to be able to include pieces of on our site. And we will be sending you the link also for the full curriculum so you can explore it. And also she is has created a chamber rock opera called A Kaddish for Bernie Madoff, which is currently being made into an independent feature film. So stay tuned for that. Alicia, we are so excited to have you here with us from Portland. I'm really excited for you to help us reflect on Passover and on the very strange circumstances in which we find ourselves celebrating this year. So welcome.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here. I'm going to start with a couple songs I think that are Passover related. Sound good, Judith?
That sounds perfect. I think music is a great place to start. Do you want to, well, start with the songs, then you can tell us a little bit about Girls in Trouble and where they fit in.
Yeah, and I might introduce them a little bit first so that people kind of know what's happening. So yeah, so Girls in Trouble, which Judith mentioned, is this project where I take stories of women in the Torah, and I research the original story as well as rabbinic and other interpretations over the centuries. And then I make my own interpretation in which I sing in their voice. So I sort of bring them to life in my version of them. And my hope is that eventually everyone will be making their own midrashim. So I don't want this to be the definitive version. It's kind of my version of these characters' stories. And sometimes I use my violin, and I'm just going to mention, since you can't see my feet right now, there's some electronic pedals by my feet, and one of them that I'm using today is called a loop pedal. So you'll hear when I play violin, I step on this pedal and then it records it, and you'll hear it, it's going through a little amplifier. So you'll hear me building these layers, but it's not pre-recorded tracks. It's something that I'm building as we go. And I'm going to use that on the first song, which I'm going to play two songs for you, which are both related to Passover, because here we are. And the second one is about Miriam, but the first one is about Sarah bat Asher, who's much more obscure than Miriam. And she's mentioned in the Torah, but only barely. But then the rabbis kind of take her name and run with it and have these beautiful legends about who she was. And she's a bit of a, female analog to Elisha, I think, the prophet Elisha. So I've been thinking this year, if it were up to me, in addition to maybe the cup of Miriam, there would be a cup for Sarah bat Asher as well, because she's seen to be this immortal spirit, kind of like Elijah, who comes back and visits us. And she also has the gift of song. So I was really excited to write a song in her voice. In the rabbi's imagination, one of the things that she does is come from Egypt up to the land of Canaan to tell Jacob that his son Joseph is actually still alive and living in Egypt, even though Jacob has thought for a long time that his son was dead. And Jacob is so old by this point that it's dangerous to share this kind of shocking information. And so her uncles try to figure out how can we tell our father that our brother's still alive. And they say, oh, Sarah has this gift of song. So we're going to have her create a song to convey this information to Jacob. So this is, in my mind, this is the song that Sarah Bat Asher might have sung to her great uncle Jacob. And it also has a little bit of other rabbinic legends about her relationship to the Exodus story in it. I'll show you what you have. The pearl inside the oyster of your heart. I've seen the bones rise from the river. I've watched them shining in the dark. Find the one you love. I know him and he's looking for you too. The waters parted, but it wasn't like they said. No iron wall came down to hold them. Like mine, touching all the hidden walls of time.
Thank you.
Yeah. And I forgot to mention that it can be hard to hear lyrics and things like that on through the computer. And so all of the songs and all the lyrics are on our website, which is girlsintroublemusic.com. And you can search by character. So if you ever want to go back and figure out exactly what I was saying.
And yeah, and you offer terrific keys for each of the lines and sort of what the midrashim were behind that. I have to say, Sarah Bat Asher is one of my favorites too, because she serves as this kind of carrier of memory. The rabbis give her, the rabbis understand her story as being about really carrying the memory of the people. They turned to her to remember where Joseph's bones were buried. And as you referred to also in the song, what the walls of the split sea look like. And so for me as a historian, and particularly a historian who focuses on women's history, to think about women being the carriers of history and of Jewish collective memory is an incredibly powerful image. And so she kind of shines for me as this prophet of the kind of work we do at JWA.
I love that. And I love that also the rabbis, when they have her describing how the sea split, they actually have her kind of appearing in the Beit Midrash in the study hall while the rabbis are studying and correcting them and saying, actually, this is really how it was. And so the fact that the rabbis would write a Midrash in which a woman is coming to correct the rabbis is pretty, I really appreciate that.
Yeah, exactly. So what is kind of calling to you about Serach in this particular Pesach?
Well, I mean, I'm really fascinated with human bodies, and I write a lot in my songs and in my poetry about the experience of living in a body, especially as a woman, but also just human, and how complicated that is, how kind of endlessly fascinating that is. But this year, I feel like because of the pandemic, which is a physical thing, it's about our bodies, but to keep our bodies safe and others' bodies safe, those of us who are able to are taking our bodies out of the public space, right? And staying at home and connecting in this way that is actually kind of transcending the body, right? Like we're using technology to be together when we're not physically together. And I think there's something about the Serach legend that, I mean, it's almost like an ancient version of technology to think about this sort of, she becomes immortal as a reward. Jacob gives her the sort of says, thank you so much for singing this beautiful song. You've kind of eased my heart and healed me. And I want you to, may death have no power over you, which is essentially a way of saying you are now freed of the limitations that the body brings with it, I think. So that's what she means to me this year, is that I think there's an element of us all kind of taking on a bit of this taste, brief taste of kind of temporary, you know, because of the restrictions that are put on, that we're taking on physically, we're also kind of transcending some of those restrictions. I mean, as someone who moved from the East Coast to the West Coast 7 years ago, I still miss so many people there. And I've really found that I've been connecting profoundly with, you know, my friends and family on the East Coast in the last month in a way that I haven't been able to for the last 7 years, because suddenly we're all kind of equidistant. So that's, I think Sarah has a lot of that in her story.
I love that. And at the same time, I think there's the kind of awareness of just the fragility of our bodies, right? Like that Jacob would, this thing he wants most, to be reunited with his son, could kill him because he is a fragile old man.
Yes, and that the way, I mean, one thing I love about the story so much that I talk about in the curriculum unit that I wrote to accompany it is how art, in this case song, can really play a pastoral role, and that's not some kind of modern thinking, but essentially like Serach Bat Asher becomes a pastor in a way, right? She gives pastoral care in this way to Jacob. She eases his heart and she comforts him and also safely gives him this information. And the way she does it is through song. It couldn't have been done through the gentlest of speech, apparently, you know, even by his beloved sons. And I think about the power of art to connect us. I think that's very, very deep.
It's beautiful. And how about Miriam?
Yeah, so Miriam, I will confess that my Miriam song is maybe slightly more depressing. I hope not. The intention is not to be depressing, but I call this project, these songs, which began as my master's thesis at JTS, Jewish Theological Seminary. I call it Girls in Trouble because every song is about a woman character in some way from the Torah. And the trouble part is because I'm interested in looking at some of the moments that are less often considered because they're more difficult or more challenging, or they're stories that we wouldn't teach children. And then some of us stop learning Torah stories after we're, you know, bat mitzvah or whatever. So when I sat down to write about Miriam, I wanted to write not about her triumph at the sea, which is wonderful, but has already been written about and celebrated. I wanted to write about a moment in the desert, right? When the Israelites are wandering And when she and her brother Aaron criticize their brother Moses to God, and in response, only Miriam is stricken with this leprosy, and her skin turns white as snow. And God says to her, you're going to have to leave the camp for a couple weeks. And Moses prays on her behalf. And in the end, God says, okay, fine. You still have to leave for a week though, because, and this is from the Torah, God says, if her father spit in her face, wouldn't she have to bear her shame for 7 days? So this is another story about the body and community and distance. And so I wanted to keep her company in this moment, and think about what it means that we all have moments of kind of success, and then moments when we find ourselves on the outside, whether justly or unjustly. So I wanted to sit with Miriam in this moment. And so this is my song in Miriam's voice called Snow, Scorpions, and Spiders. Well, my mother named me Bitter, although as a child I was so kind, hiding myself in the reeds to watch over my brother. But still my name was Bitter, bitter the taste of the sea, bitter the cries of the horses drowning behind us. If anybody had asked me, I might not have chosen to go. But everyone knows sometimes you don't have a choice. So when he said you're banished 7 days in the desert alone, I just started walking. I knew there was nothing to say. The scorpions and the spiders crawled up to me and stopped in my shade. Together in silence we watched as the sun crossed the sky. If anybody had asked me, I might not have chosen to go. But everyone knows sometimes you don't have a choice. And if your father spit in your face, wouldn't you want to leave that place? And if your skin should turn to snow, wouldn't you have to go? And if your God should turn from you, wouldn't you turn too? Still, I don't regret a minute, and I don't regret an hour of the week that I lived all alone at the top of the mountain. Though no voice came down from heaven, and I never saw words written in fire, I did see the birds of prey pick all the carcasses clean. If anybody had asked me, I might not have chosen to go. But everyone knows sometimes you don't have a choice. And if your father spit in your face, wouldn't you want to leave that place?
think that's one of my very favorite Girls in Trouble songs. So beautiful. And I'm really struck just by the kind of images of distancing. I mean, it's very different from the distancing we're all experiencing now because we're all distancing at the same time. But I think you do such an amazing job of evoking like a different kind of spirituality of loneliness that is not the spirituality we normally encounter in the story of the Israelites in the desert.
Yeah, and I wanted to think about, Moses, her brother, also has an experience of leaving the Israelite people, going away for a while. And in Moses's story, he's receiving the Torah, right? So he's coming close, he's going off into the desert and meeting God as closely as possible, and then carrying this Torah back. So, I mean, in my mind, I thought, well, wouldn't there be a Torah that Miriam would receive as well? Like if she goes off for a week and is alone in the desert, and I have to say the people wait for her in this story, which is a really beautiful thing, which is part of why I don't think it's such a tragic story, because the community shows up for her in that way. But wouldn't there be something that she would learn there as well, and that she would bring back to the people? So I really wanted to kind of ask that question.
Mm-hmm. And even though she's alone, you talk about, the way that she is speaking is acknowledging that she's part of a community. She's like that, the piece about not having a choice about whether you go or not, because sometimes it's not about the individual, it's about what's happening to the whole community.
Yeah, and in my imagination, this is totally just coming out of my head, but that in the song I gave her this spider and the scorpion who are kind of keeping her company, and there's a sense of like, even in moments when, in terms of the community or the human community we feel on the outside, there's a different lens that we can look at, where we can kind of connect to other elements perhaps of nature, or of the cycles that we're a part of, that we may be a little bit out of touch with the human cycle, but there are other realities that open to us in those moments, and maybe the natural world is one of them.
Right, and these things which we might think of as threatening, like scorpions, could actually be companions as opposed to enemies.
Right.
Which I really love. So do you want to say anything else about Girls in Trouble and sort of how you think about the work that you've done with putting all of these stories, putting these women's stories into voice and to music and to education?
It's been really moving. I mean, it's been 12 years now. It's been the first album. There are 3 albums of Girls in Trouble, and they're on Spotify or wherever you get music, you can find them. And the first one came out in 2009. So that's 11 years ago already. And my husband is the bass player now I mostly tour solo because now we have 2 kids, but we used to tour as a 4-piece. And so it's been this huge part of my, my kind of academic life, my musical life, and my family life in a really lovely way. And we have done, kind of 50-50 Jewish world performances and kind of greater just music or art world experiences. And it's been so moving to take these stories into different realms and see the way that our kind of foundational myths and stories and legends, they work, they work in all these different realms because they're made to give context to our human experience. So I just feel incredibly privileged to get to spend time with these stories. And I kind of honestly think of the characters as friends. And I'm still writing new ones. Like an Esther one finally kind of came out this year. So out of my mind. So I'll probably have it recorded by next Purim because it was too close to Purim. And then the last thing I'll say is that after I created the songs and was traveling around performing them and doing kind of storytelling about women in Torah, Jewish educators or individuals would come up and say, how can I find out, what you're referring to, or how can I bring this into my classroom? And so that's what prompted the Girls in Trouble curriculum, which was supported by the Covenant Foundation. I got to partner with Jewish Women's Archive, which was wonderful. And so it's about to come out right before Shavuot, the last units, so that every single song that I've written and put out will have an accompanying study guide, which can be used on your own or in a classroom or with a friend, so that all of the texts that are in my mind as I'm studying about the song and kind of thinking about how to write it are there for you. And also I've included some essays about each character, where I was coming from and what it meant to me. So that's been kind of another privilege and joy to get to really unpack in a literal way, which artists don't always get to kind of comment on their own work in that way. So I'm so glad that I got to do that, because now I feel like what is in my mind and heart is really out of it now, and it's sort of there for anyone who's interested.
It's also such an invitation to people to be creative readers of Torah, because you base all of the songs on midrash from the rabbis, but then your songs are themselves another layer of midrash. And so it just invites people into that process of saying, we can look at these characters, we can breathe our own life into them. Different things are going to resonate with us. We're going to have different, and we bring our own interpretive lenses, and that actually enriches the story for everybody. So it's such a beautiful invitation.
Yeah, and actually each unit ends with some creative prompts that if people want, because my greatest joy would be to see other people arguing with my interpretations in the form of giving their own interpretations. So that's why I really wanted to end each study guide with opening out to some prompts of like, how would you interpret this story in, through movement or through song or through writing?
I think also to me, the whole idea of celebrating them as girls in trouble is really powerful, because so often when we pick and choose the few women in the Torah to talk about, we put them on a pedestal and we really provide them as these kinds of like perfect models, or else we don't know what to do with them. And I think being able to really unearth them in their complexity and look at what was not always perfect or really troubling about the stories. The stories sometimes don't get taught because they're hard. And to be able to kind of lift up those voices and not erase those pieces of the story, I think is so important.
I agree. And there are some that are so brutal that I don't want to write songs about them. Like, I don't want to be an apologist for the kind of outliers that are so truly awful that I can't really find anything redeeming in them. But the vast majority, there's actually so much strength in the women's stories themselves. And it's not like it's some later interpretation of like, actually, I think she would have said this if I didn't grow up studying a lot of Torah. And so I sort of imagined that this book, that's our holy book, would be full of perfect people living perfect lives. And I was really gratified when I was 21 and went to yeshiva at Pardes in Jerusalem and started studying, to find that I had come out of studying literature at Barnard, and the same complexity that makes great literature obviously was in these stories, but I just didn't know to expect it. And I found it so comforting that if anything that we are going through in our own lives is going to be reflected in this sacred book. It doesn't expect us to have these perfect kind of conflict-free lives.
Right. So it's wonderful to start with music and really brings your voice into this in such a full way. I know you've also you're also a poet, obviously. We talked about your books of poetry, but I know you've particularly been writing some pandemic poetry. And I was hoping you might tell us a little bit about your bathtub pandemic poems, and maybe share one or two with us.
I would love to. Yeah. So first, just because they happen to be in front of me, I'll just hold up my actual book so they don't feel left out. So you can find these wherever you get books. But what I am going to read to you now looks like this, because it's brand new. I'm gonna read one. So essentially, in the morning I kind of half homeschool, half unschool my kids. In the afternoon, my husband takes over with that, and I do my work. And then at night, I kind of get in the bathtub, which is my place where I escape. And I found myself very early on just beginning to write poems in the bathtub, which is not what you're really supposed to do, because it means I have my phone with me, but that's what's been working for me, and I am doing it. So I call them bathtub pandemic poems for that reason. They're really about what is happening right now. And because we've been leading up to Passover and now we're in it, a lot of them have been about the relationship of Passover to what's happening. So I'm going to read one called Passover 5780. It's from a couple weeks ago. As our ancestors painted their doorposts with lamb's blood, stayed inside and held their children close, we wash our hands, wipe down our shopping carts, and keep our kids off the playground for the first time in their lives. In this plague spring, when the leaders fail us, we try to keep each other alive. We are midwives of solitude and survival. When a baby is born, a mother touches the membrane between life and death and is forever changed, as we are changed by this shadow, which approaches closer every day. What is there to do but lift up what we love, chanting, Pass over us, angel of death. Pass over us all. Turn back into the myth you used to be before you became the news. And I'll read one more. This is about Zoom. It's about, interacting with people in this bizarre medium that we find ourselves. And it refers to an amulet that a rabbi in New York, Rabbi Amichai Lau-Levi, posted this amulet against the plague from a few hundred years ago on his Facebook feed. And I thought, oh yeah, that's what I need. So, and actually Serach Bat Asher is in this poem as well. Things I've heard and said this week. Please mute yourself and listen. Please unmute yourself and speak. Let's take a moment to breathe. Let's take turns saying our names. Would you like to hold up your volcano? Would you like to draw an elephant? I'm so sorry. I thought it was yesterday. I'm so sorry. I thought it was tomorrow. How are we doing? Are we okay? Everybody doing okay? Here is an amulet to print and hang above your door. Here, an old story about a young woman who saved her grandfather by singing. Here is my living room, my bedroom, my porch, my basement, my kitchen. Here are the windows across the street and the faces behind those windows. When we venture out, we give each other a wide berth like ships in rocky waters, humbled by the sea. We wave to each other through windows and screens. We sing and raise a glass, simultaneous, but not together. Oh, my friends, my beloved strangers, I never knew our closeness until it was gone. And I saw a request in the chat field for the word. So these are all, I'm sort of sharing these freely. They're on my Facebook page, which is just Alicia Jo Rabins. And they're on my Instagram page, which is Alicia Jo. And there's also a page on my website where I'm posting them if you don't do social media, which is aliciajo.com/pandemicpoems. So I just want people to be able to have them if they want them.
We'll be sharing we're sharing the links now in the chat, and we'll be sharing all of them afterwards in a follow-up email as well, so that everybody has access.
Great.
We have a question from someone, and people should be feeling free to share questions all along here. This is a throwback to the Girls in Trouble conversation, but maybe we could put this piece in too. A little bit about some of the women that you haven't wanted to write about, or why, sort of a little bit about that piece, because it's very intriguing. And then also maybe a little bit more about the amulet against plagues, because that is very intriguing and something I'm sure many people would love to have access to or more information about.
Yeah, so like Lot's daughters, who he sort of offers to these, guests who have come to this city who seem kind of violent. I mean, that's an example. The stories in which a woman is sort of just has no agency and violence occurs to her. I don't really want to write about those unless there's something in the story in which she manages to take that agency back, right? So there's like the story of Tamar in Genesis, where she does a lot of great stuff, and then it kind of complicated stuff, and it leads to a point where the people of the town are threatening to kind of calling for her to be burned alive, right? So that's very violent, but she turns it on its head and kind of reveals that actually that's not what's going to happen, and that's not what happens. So stories like that I write about, but stories in which something just happens to a woman for no reason, those I don't really like to write about. And what was the other question? Oh,
a little bit more about the amulet.
Yes. So it's I think I think it's on I can post it somewhere, but it's essentially it's a printed out page and there are a number of these that have been kind of circulating, so you could probably even look it up online, but it was after the printing press, right? So they're not like super ancient, these particular ones. And so it'll have just kind of prayers against plague and invocations of certain angels. This one that he shared actually had Serach Bat Asher's name there. And they're sort of these like segula, right? Like it's like a magical paper that probably would have been small and maybe wrapped up and worn or something like that. But it's physically words on a page.
That's one of the interesting things is we sometimes think from a modern Jewish perspective that those kinds of magical things are somehow like idolatrous or separate from Jewish practice. But of course, there's a whole lot of Jewish practice that incorporates those. And we just don't always learn about them. So it's, and also partially because they're part of a more kind of domestic part of Judaism, right? They're things that people do privately at home, things you might hang in your house. They're not necessarily part of a kind of public sphere of Judaism. But some, as someone's pointing out in the chat, are more normalized, like the mezuzah, and some are less normalized, and we don't really hear about them so much anymore. But we get to pull them out and find the kind of Jewish roots to different kinds of expressions of practice and hope and luck. Was this particular amulet against the plague, the Black Death?
I forget which plague it was, but it was a plague. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Right. I feel like there's a lot of interest now in kind of like looking back at all these different moments. We talked in one of our previous quarantine book clubs about a book that has part of it takes place during the plague in London, and sort of mining the history of epidemics and trying to understand, okay, what can we learn about the way that people coped in different times, even though our circumstances are so different now.
Absolutely. Yeah. And there was a recent Judaism Unbound interview with Rabbi B'nai Lappi. And I loved one thing she was saying is that no one in a lifetime, no matter how wise you are, even no generation can contain all the wisdom that you need. Like we need transgenerational wisdom. And that's one of the things that Judaism does. It holds that kind of wisdom, and also the study of history in general. But to have thousands of years of human experience in this body of knowledge, that when something comes up that no one has really consciously experienced on a social level like this, instead of thinking it's the first time it's ever happened, we can do exactly, we have this impulse, right, to go back and say, okay, what happened before? How did people deal with this? And it can be very comforting.
Right. Well, that's why we have Sarach Bar Asher. We need Sarach Bar Asher to come back and tell us, how did we survive the plagues of the past? Because she would know, right? She was the witness to every generation.
Exactly.
And she would know how to tell us in a way that we could actually hear and be comforted, as opposed to scared out of our minds, which is too often, I think, how people like to share that kind of information.
So true.
Lex, I know you had a couple of questions you wanted to jump in and ask.
I do. Oh my God. And this is great time. So first off, I've made my background into some wonderful books of Alicia Jo Rabins, Fruit Geo, Divinity School. You should go to aliciajo.com/writing and you can see links to both of those. Okay, this is perfect because what you just said about the 1,000-year, a poem that you wrote also really, really recently, the part that's been sticking with me is when you mentioned that we need your 1,000-year view. And you're speaking to Jewish ancestors there. And that has been something I've been holding a lot recently. And I guess what I've been thinking about it in both directions, right? Like I've been thinking about how we need the wisdom of somebody like Sarach Bar Asher, right? Who can take us back to our deepest past. But also we need to be inhabiting the 1,000-year view forward too. Like this, I think in many ways, this moment like throws us in both, maybe it's a timeless moment, I don't know, but it feels to me like, I don't know, like this sliver of Judaism happening all over Zoom, it feels like something that might become more common in the future. And so I guess I'm curious to hear from you on that. Like when you wrote that beautiful poem, there's more to the poem, by the way, I'll put the full.
Maybe, I could really briefly.
Do you want to read it?
Yeah, it's only about 12 lines, so I can read it.
Yeah. So I'd love to hear you on that, and then just a little more from you on the 1,000-year view.
Yeah. Okay. So it's called On Breathing. I'm okay during the day, but at night I get scared, which makes it hard to breathe, which is a symptom of the pandemic, which is what scares me. Well played, anxiety, my old friend. You've always warned me something like this might happen. You're a gift from my ancestors who survived plagues and worse. They wove you into my DNA to warn me so that I too might survive. Now that it's happening, anxiety, I don't need you anymore. I need the ones who gave you to me. So hear me, ancestors who lived through danger times. I'm ready for you now. All these years I've carried your worries in my bones. Now I need your love your 1,000-year view. Tell me it's going to be okay. Remind me you made it through, and we will too. Teach me to breathe. You know, I had not thought about 1,000 years future. I mean, you just kind of blew my mind, because I've really been looking back for, which I think I always do, for solace and for a sense of perspective. I think it's so easy to think, this has never happened before. This is completely unprecedented. No one's ever dealt with this. And for me to look back in human history, look back in Jewish history, look back in spiritual wisdom, you know, and say, oh, this is something that happens to humans, and now we are having this experience. That is very comforting to me. But I hadn't thought about looking forward. So I'd love to hear what you think about it, because it's like I said, it's blowing my mind.
I actually see some of it in the poem that you read earlier about all the things that you'd heard in one day, because I think that that's part of it. It's that, and that's part of what being home, I think, has given all of us, is we can't compartmentalize. It's all right in front of us. The very mundane logistical things of how you get your computer to work, how do you keep your kids occupied and engaged and not terrified, how do we maintain our own sanity, where are the moments that we're finding meaning, what are the moments of connection that keep us going, and it's all of a piece and intermixed, and a big jumble that can only find kind of find coherence in a poem. And like, that's the piece that we're going to hand forward, I think, is that there's a creativity that comes out of that mess if we can figure out how to hold it.
I do feel that, yeah. And I also, can I read one more short one, then I'll stop with the poems, because I just realized that in a way, maybe I was thinking about it in the back of my mind. This is to my children in the 4th week of the pandemic. I'm sorry you cannot play with your friends, can't touch the swings, the monkey bars, the slide, can't have a birthday party when you turn 8 next week, can't go to school, can't visit your grandparents, your little cousins. In the 4th week of this new regime, I hear myself say, no, 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 and realize that in normal times, to withhold these simple joys from you would be cruel. But these are not normal times. Here is my wish as your mother, that one day when you are grown, you will understand these days are filled with the no of love, which opens the door to 1,000,000 days of yes. I mean, I thought of this because there is this kind of fulcrum of, I've been looking back to the past, but of course, those of us who are just able to stay at home, we're doing that proactively to prepare for a future, right? To enable a future to occur. And I mean, it reminds me of the story of Choni, of planting the carob tree, seeing somebody planting a tree and saying that's not going to bear fruit for 70 years. Why would you plant something? You're going to be dead by the time it bears fruit. He says, oh, but my grandson, my grandchild will benefit from it. That we're always a fulcrum, right? We're always looking back for wisdom, but we birth the future, and our actions open up into the future. And I think that we are, at this moment of extreme pressure, we do have a possibility of opening in ways that can generate a more positive future. In a way, I think we have more power to change the future now than we might have a few months ago.
We understand that everything that is happening is going to have that impact, right? Like, so much of the time we don't stop to think that all the moment that we're in is going to shape us so deeply, even though we are shaped by many different moments, but we have that awareness right now. At one of our seders, our friend and teacher, Art Green, zoomed in the middle of the night from Jerusalem to join us for a little bit, and talked to the kids at the seder, his grandchildren and my kids, and talked about what it was like to grow up and have the defining moment of his life really be the Vietnam War, and all the things that kind of rocked his world about living through that and changed who he was and his worldview and his politics, and and created a whole new counterculture that has shaped so much of what our lives look like. And he said, this is going to be that moment for you kids. Like, this is you're going to be the children who will always remember this experience and will be shaped by it. And he was saying it in exactly that frame. Like, on the one hand, it's sad and scary, and no one wants to feel like this is going to be shaping, changing our children. On the other hand, all the creativity that can come out of any experience that has that kind of indelible impact on a generation.
And I was talking to a friend a couple of days ago. We were going on like a run together, meaning like on our Bluetooth headphones talking. We run together. So we were running like a few miles apart. But, I had Seder with my parents for the first time in 19 years, I think this year, because we get together for Thanksgiving instead of Passover. So we never get to be in the same place. And she was saying that her great aunt, who's, like 80 something, is the matriarch of the family, but she lives in the Midwest. So she's never at the big family Seders. And so this year she was, right? Everyone was wherever they were. And her great aunt, the matriarch, got to light the candles for everyone. And there are these beautiful possibilities opening up that it's sort of like, yeah, why didn't we do that before? Like, why couldn't a family connect for Seder just because we were in a different city? So I do think, yeah, there's a lot happening.
Yeah, okay, man, this is opening up a lot for me. I mean, to the point you brought up before, where you sort of reflected back on me and like asked what I think about the future looking part. I mean, I've been thinking a lot about the Talmud, and specifically the weirdest cases in the Talmud. Because, so like the one I've been thinking about, and I promise this will make some amount of sense. There's an elephant that is used as a wall of a sukkah in one point in the Talmud. And the question I've been asking is like, okay, some weird set of things had to be happening in some location or in the world for that idea to even happen. Like, why would an elephant even be there such that you'd write the hypothetical in the Talmud about like, does an elephant's body count as a wall? And what I've been thinking is like, okay, so when we have these hyper weird moments, like a coronavirus, COVID-19, like that feels to me precisely when we have the potential to be generating long-term kinds of views, because they're so weird. Like they force us to expand our consciousness around how we have, I mean, you just said it with Passover, like, of course now is when we do the first time ever Passover thing on Zoom because we had to. When you have, I mean, it's cliche, but necessity, mother of invention, all that stuff. And so I guess like part of me is excited by the fact of that in this moment. I think that it would surprise me more if we don't have Jewish rituals in a few hundred years that trace back to this than if we did. Like it feels like we have to. It's so we're every huge trauma, we have rituals that started in that trauma. So that's like the Lex rant. The question I want to ask you, that's a bit of I mean, this is a gear shift. So do you want to reflect on that piece at all, or should I ask?
No, I love it. I love what you said.
Okay. So this is a bit of a gear shift, but it's like, I love talking with you about sort of the blurring and transcending of boundaries between different modalities. So you are an educator, you are an artist. Your bio says something like artist, educator, Torah teacher, 3 cool descriptors. And I guess what I'm curious about is when so you're somebody who writes music, you're somebody who writes poetry, you're somebody who teaches Torah, you have some idea or some calling, like what happens to lead you to write a song about it versus write a poem about it versus create a beautiful curriculum around it as an educator? Like what are the different things that would call you in each of those directions?
I think that this really relates to what you were just talking about, actually. I think, in a way, I have a kind of radical view that all is really one, like Adonai Echad, that everything is really one, right? And then we separate it down, and specialize. And all of those specializations are just different technologies for saying the same exact thing in a way, or that enable us to approach a different element of it or communicate with a different group. So I see all of my work for a long time, I was a little bit troubled that I kind of work in all these modalities, and people would, I would go to an artist training and they would say like, you have to really choose one so that people know your brand. And, and I felt like, no, I really do. All of them are coming from the same place. They feel unified to me, even though they look kind of different externally. And I think for me, it comes down to which technology is the best technology for this particular question. And so I've found that telling stories of women in Torah, for me, I love doing it through music, because there's so much emotional content in music that it can carry a lot of the narrative emotions that I love so much about these stories. And also they're originally written down. So I feel like for me, bringing music into it adds something, as like for me to just rewrite them into poetry wouldn't be as exciting. I think just adding an element feels more kind of technologically exciting to me as a practice. But when I'm like processing my day in a time of global pandemic and just kind of trying to reflect on like, I mean, I had to stop watching Colbert because like for some reason I couldn't breathe. I would just get so stressed out, even though he's so wonderful and kind and he's like broadcasting from his house, but it was like giving me this crazy anxiety. And then I would be like, oh my God, I have the virus. It's like very early days before there was a lot of clarity. And so that's literally, then I said to my husband, like, I have to go take a bath. So I literally just went, sat in the bath, and that poem came out. And that's what needed to happen that night for me to process these emotions. And then teaching Torah, I mean, doing something like this, it's so lovely to have these to have our tradition as a vehicle for us all to meet around. I mean, it's almost like sharing a meal, it's like, why have a dinner party instead of just getting together at 4? Because there's this lovely technology of a structure that we can all meet in. And I think that in some ways that's what religion offers us. And so I love being able to show up and teach a group of adults or work with a group of kids or whatever. And we don't have to all think the same thing, and we don't have to dress the same, and we don't have to be in the same emotional space at that moment, because we can kind of meet in our tradition, right? It's very empowering. So that's how I think of it. It's in my mind, it's all ways of exploring what it is to be alive and how to have the most meaningful life possible. And different media and forms work better for different parts of it.
It makes me wonder, as you speak about sort of the different modalities that work for different things, sort of like what artworks are bringing you comfort and joy in this moment? Who are you turning? I mean, I assure you that so many people who are part of this conversation right now are, as we know from the chat, are, finding so much comfort and beauty and insight from what you've shared tonight. And I know that you must be also finding that somewhere too.
Yeah, well, right now, I think in part because I have a 5-year-old and about to turn 8-year-old, as the poem said. And so there's not a lot of like reading time for me.
Yes.
And so music has been such a lifeline, because I can be working with them, doing some craft or something, but put on music that helps me just kind of create an environment and feel the way that I want to feel. So for some reason, I've been listening to Nick Drake's album Pink Moon a lot, which is odd because we just had that pink moon, like astrological thing happen. I've been listening to the album Sleep by Max Richter, which is so beautiful. And if anyone doesn't know that and needs like a calming, peaceful album, it's this beautiful piano and strings, kind of abstract, very calming album. And often in the bathtub, I'm listening to that while I'm writing these poems. I've been listening to like Marissa Anderson, who's a Portland guitarist. I've been listening to her a lot. And Tara Jane O'Neill is a beautiful guitarist, singer. A lot of kind of calm, meditative music that just like colors, because the news and Twitter and all those things, kind of everything feels very amped up. And I find that music is an amazing counterweight to that, to just bring me back into the moment, back to my body.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, and I will list those artists as we talk.
I also was thinking, as you were talking about your poem about anxiety and about looking to your ancestors to teach you what they have to teach you. And it was such a great reframe for me about inherited trauma, basically, which we often think of as this kind of heavy burden of an inheritance, something that has, we kind of talk about epigenetics as Jews and think we make all kinds of jokes about like, oh, well, now that we know about epigenetics, it explains a lot about why Jewish people are so anxious and all the things that we've internalized deep into our, on a cellular level, and struggling with sort of how do we bear that as part of our tradition, but to think of it instead as something that can be in the right moment a gift. In some ways, to me, it feels sort of like how, I've been thinking a lot about how now people who have had COVID-19 are going to have the antibodies and are going to be immune. Basically, we don't know for how long, so that makes it a little tricky, but those are going to be the people who can be free in the world and who can help other people without being scared of passing on the disease or getting it again themselves. And so, to think about like our inherited trauma as a kind of antibody in some way too, or a resource that we can draw on. That's
so beautiful. I love that. And my father actually at the Zoom Seder, he presented this beautiful idea about memory. He's a memory specialist. So about how holding on to traumatic memories can be very problematic, but there's a way of he said it much more beautifully than I am, but there's a way of also kind of transforming them into something that we can learn from and move forward from, that we don't have to forget them or shove them under the rug. There's a way to process them and kind of incorporate them. And I think I've heard teachers of mine talk about the Seder as that, right? Of using this theatrical reenactment of a traumatic community experience to heal ourselves and to turn it into something that's a catalyst for growth and for community and for positivity in our lives. And I feel a lot of that in terms of what you're saying as well.
I love that way of thinking about the Seder. Well, thank you so much for being with us tonight, Alicia. This was just beautiful and just added a whole other level of Passover celebration and joy for me, and I'm sure for many other people, and just another way to celebrate together. It's an additional, not a Seder, but another way to bring voices and reflections on Passover into our holiday. I see that people have been finding all kinds of links to amulets and other things there, so we'll be able to go deeper into that and take a look at that and bring that with us. And it's just wonderful to hear your music and your poetry and your Torah. So thank you so much for being with us and sharing that tonight.
Yeah, thanks to everyone. Thanks for having me, Judith and Lex.
It was wonderful to have you. And I'm very excited to be able to say that we have extended the Quarantine Book Club due to popular demand. So we've added several more sessions, which you will be able to find advertised both at JWA and at Jewish Live. And our next meeting will be on Thursday, April 23rd at 8 p.m. Eastern Time with Sarah Hurwitz, who is a former speechwriter to Michelle Obama and the author of a great book, Here All Along, Finding Meaning, Spirituality, and a Deeper Connection to Life in Judaism After Finally Choosing to Look There. So I encourage you to join us then too. And I hope that you will follow JWA and Jewish Live on any of the channels that you may use on social media, as well as on our sites. JWA also has a new season of our podcast, Can We Talk, which has recently been released, and which you can find wherever you get your podcasts. You'll find new content there, as well as lots of old episodes, including some with some of the upcoming folks on the Quarantine Book Club, if you want to get a little taste of some of their work earlier. Lexa, do you want to add anything here?
I just want to say thank you again, Alicia Jo, for joining us, for bringing music, for bringing poetry, for bringing wisdom, all of it. It's been such a good conversation, and it's great to have you here.
So great to be here. Blessings to everyone.
Yes, thank you all. Good night. Wishing you a very healthy and happy and sweet rest of Pesach. Now I'm going to copy the chat.
Now Judith, can you just close the live stream?
Yes, I will.